Welcome to another 50 Acres Academy webinar. Today's webinar is on government relations, lobbying and the federal budget. And it's really great to have you all here today. We do a series of free webinars for not-for-profits, and this is one of a series which will keep continuing. We'll have some news on our next one. I'll tell you about our next one at the end of today's webinar. So we're talking today about government engagement, which for not-for-profits is often a difficult thing to do because of funding and resources. It's always a pressure point for not-for-profits. And today we're going to think about how you can manage this effort and this engagement process for not a lot of expenditure, certainly minimising expenditure, maximising your gain, and really utilising the resources that you've got amongst your organisation, which I think is really important. So what we're going to cover today is looking at planning your campaign and the skills and tactics you need for engagement, communicating in Canberra. Most people will want to at some stage communicate federally. And I think it's important to think about how you do that and the tactics and the stakeholders that you need to engage with. And then we'll talk about the 2015 federal budget and what you need to think about in terms of planning for that. There's plenty of time for questions, so do please pop up a question if you've got one into the questions box, and I will get to that through the course of the webinar. So planning your government relations campaign and the skills and the tactics you need to do it. Now, obviously this is, as I said before, really fraught issue for not-for-profits because of budgets and resources. There's so much to do, so much you want to achieve, but there is, it's always difficult to prioritise what that might look like. So let's have a think about what you need to do before you develop your government relations plan. The first thing is to think about what the operating environment is. It's really important to think about what's achievable. Can you go into a meeting or an engagement to start a campaign and go, well, we want, to completely revise and rework this particular piece of legislation. We want to get a whole lot of funding from the government. We'd like to get state government funding. We'd like to get all these donors on board, and we'd like to get a whole lot of corporate engagement as well and money on board. And you think to yourself, you look at this list and you go, you sort of know that that's just not going to happen. So, what is the operating environment? What's likely to happen? Where are you likely to have your success? And I think you need to head there. That's not to say that you forget about the other things. You can obviously pursue, everything and anything, but you've really got to think about what's likely to succeed before you head down the road of your campaign. Your objectives need to be measurable and they need to be realistic. So again, can you achieve a wholesale, review of the Fair Work Act? Probably not. The government said that they're not going to be amending it. Can you achieve all the funding requirements that you need right now? Probably not, based on the environment that we're operating in, which is a tight budgetary environment. So what is realistic in terms of the objectives of your campaign? And also, how will you measure them? One of the really good ways of measuring contact and communication is via social media. But social media isn't the end all and be all of what you're doing. What also is a measurement, and a good measurement, is to assess what has, where have your messages gone? Are they resonating with people? Are people using the material and the messages that you've given them? Is there a take-up of what you've asked them to do? Are you changing behaviour? It's not just about getting 62 meetings. It's about looking at those meetings and going, what are the outcomes of those meetings? Where have we succeeded? And some of those things are intangible. Some of those things are, not necessarily measured in dollars and distance. They're measured in intangibles. So you've really got to think about how you will measure what you're doing. You need to think about your targets. Sometimes they're individuals. They might be, champions that you may be able to get on board for an issue. It may be groups in the sector that you may be able to get on board to become campaign partners or be there on the day for an event to stand by you and go, we're really behind you on this. In terms of external stakeholders, there's often MPs, their advisors, their officials, their advisors in the government departments, etc. And often people forget about their own internal stakeholders. There could be, you could have 500 people who are, members of your organisation or another few thousand that are donors. You've got to make sure that they're part of what you're doing in terms of how you're going to communicate to them. It's really important that you do. So what will the messages be that you'll talk to them about? What do you want to ultimately achieve? What do you want to encourage them to do? How do you want to educate them? And how do you want to inform them? So you've got to craft all that and make sure that that's part of what you're doing. Where do you want to take these people? What is the journey you want them to go on with you? And how will you do it in terms of communication? How will you achieve that? It's not just about sending out a press release or sending out a newsletter. It's about a multi-platform approach to communications to all of your different stakeholders. Government engagement is not just about communicating with government. It's also about communicating with other people about how you're succeeding with your government engagement and what you've achieved out of it. So think about how you'll communicate with different stakeholder groups and how you do it. It might be snail mail with some of them. It might be you'll put your campaign theme on a piece of collateral that you'll use at events. It might be that you send, you do posters or leaflets, or it might be all electronic and low budget on online. You've just got to think about how you do it and what the best option is for you. Engagement. You need to think about, what that looks like now and what it's going to be over a period of time. Government engagement and government campaigns are not just a static moment in time. They're an ongoing process that helps you achieve an ultimate goal. What is the end game? What does success look like for you? Is it realistic? It may not be realistic, but it may be what you want to put out there as your long-term goal. It might be by the end of 2015, we've changed the world. Well, what does that look like for you, and how are you going to get there, and where are you going to go when you get there? Rather than just fall in a heap, how are you going to keep it going? How are you going to bring with you, like the Pied Piper in effect, how are you going to bring with you all the support, the energy that you've galvanised through your engagement process? It may not be a campaign, it might just be ongoing engagement. How will you bring all of that energy and those people with you? It's really important to have a think about that. So you need to think about some tactics to improve your engagement. Understanding the different forms of engagement is really important. There's not just one thing. It's not just about doing a meeting and going, that's it. There's lots of different ways that you might be able to engage with people, and we'll talk about that in some detail in a moment. Knowledge and research is really imperative before you start talking to people. It's a great place to start is, online, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a little while. And obviously think about how you're going to frame your message. What is your message going to be? Don't make it overly complicated. Make it reasonably simple so that it's effective, so that people don't forget what you're saying, what you're asking them to do. Make it simple, but make it meaningful, and make it so that they will, hopefully take up and do something that you want them to, which is obviously the ultimate goal. So communicating in Canberra. It's very, there's a range of different layers to communicating in Canberra, and we'll just go through those now. Now, you start with the government clearly in terms of budgets, which we'll get to in a minute. There's obviously the governments and the stakeholders, the main stakeholders and the main decision makers, but obviously depending on what your issue is, there's a whole lot of people that you shouldn't forget about, such as the opposition and the crossbench. There's a lot of people in the crossbench, both in the House and in the Senate, and I will have them all on your list. Certainly think about them all before you step off, step off the stepping stone into Parliament. It's really important to think about all the different crossbench, how they may play out for you, whether they might be on side or not. And often, crossbench will have regular meetings. Certainly the Palmers United Party are having regular meetings with the Prime Minister's office or the government to decide on what they want in a particular session and what the government wants them to do. And they have these lists, literally, that they go to a meeting with, and they'll say, this is what we want out of this session, and the government says, this is what we want, and they really do a very much a trading arrangement. So if you can get on that radar, and it's something that's got some imperative to it, then often crossbench are a good way into leveraging some stuff to happen at a federal level. And in some states as well, crossbench play a very important part. Advisors, chiefs of staff and diary secretaries, these people are really, really important with a government relations campaign or any engagement. And I often will start a client campaign or engagement process with the advisors, with the chiefs of staff. They often know more than the politicians do. The politicians are often performing seals, and they perform on cue and they eat the fish when they're meant to. But the advisors and the chiefs of staff actually know more, and you can get a more honest reading from them, I think, in terms of what they think may happen or might not happen. Whereas with the politicians, they will not always tell you the truth and won't even necessarily, look you in the eye. They will speak to the gallery, if you like, and not necessarily tell you what you need or want to know. Diary secretaries, it's an old-fashioned term, but it's very true. The people that are diary secretaries are in fact the PAs or the executive assistants to the politicians. Every politician has one in federal parliament. They're by and large women still today, and they're often people who have, are literally, sitting in the office day in, day out and work very long hours and have often been with the politicians for 10, 20 years if the politicians have been around. They're very loyal members of staff, and they are literally the holder of the diary, and they are people that you need to keep on side. So it's really important to have a relationship with those people. And so when you pick up the phone to talk to them, give them the time of day. Make sure that you have have a relationship with them and say, how are you? How is the holiday? Oh, great. That's fantastic. It's really important to have a relationship and establish that trust with the staff in the ministers' offices and the MPs' offices. Departments and agencies and officials, they're all really important things to think about and factor in your engagement. I think in the current climate, certainly in the last 12 months or so, a number of departmental officials have been a little bit more guarded in terms of saying anything or being very open, but I think this will probably change as we go forward because, I think that there is a degree of awareness now about where possible departmental cuts and budget cuts may be happening, and they're almost going through the cycle now. So I think you'll probably see departmental officials being a little bit more open with us going forward. So tactics to improve engagement, obviously, it's important to make the right choice. There's a whole range, a variety of ways that you can engage with people, from meetings to hearings and committees, informal gatherings, presentations, forums, events, and social media. And we'll go through these. Meetings is often something that people always think, we'll get a meeting with someone and that will sort it out. Well, it's not the only way you can engage with someone. Yes, meetings are important, but you can often influence in a whole variety of other ways which shouldn't be ignored, such as parliamentary hearings and committees. You can write to a parliamentary committee and suggest that they undertake an inquiry, or you can write and put in a submission about an inquiry about something. And that might be an issue, or it might be a piece of legislation, and you need to do your research about what is coming up and what is on the books of these committees, and that can be accessed by the aph.gov.au website. There's also informal gatherings, and I often say to people, don't present someone with a 30-page treatise at a informal morning tea. That's the last thing a minister or an MP would want from you. But it's a chance to be able to informally, in a friendly way, say hello. There'll be a lot of people standing around wanting to talk to them probably. So, be appropriate with the amount of time you take up. Hi, how are you? Question them about something that's small, or praise them for something that they've done that you've agreed with, whatever that is, and touch something on a human level with them in terms of an informal event. Presentations, forums and events are a really great way of networking with a lot of people really quickly. That might be a breakfast or a morning tea or an afternoon tea in Parliament, or it could be somewhere else that you might organise an event and you get someone along. So keep those all in your bevy of potential things that you might do. And social media is often a really good thing to think about. You can engage with people on social media. You can ask questions on social media. You can put up, ask a question on their Facebook site if they've got a ability to question on, or comment on a post. Keep it polite, keep it professional, keep it to the point, but think about how you might engage with them on those forums as well. Evaluating your success is really important. So, whilst I wouldn't recommend closing any avenues, you also need to think about what is the best for your organisation. So, and often having a mix is a really good thing to do. Think about what was the most successful. What happened? Why did it work so well? What was the vibe in the room? What was it that you did right in that meeting? What was it that you got right with that event? And then think, okay, how can we replicate that? And how can we, times that by a factor of 3 for the next one? What else do we need to do? So it's about being constantly vigilant and constantly thinking, what else can we do to increase this engagement? Consolidate this engagement and make it work even better than it's working now. So for stakeholder meetings, you need to have a number of things in mind before you move forward. Objectives, how you're going to prepare, and what the ask's going to be. So I think you need to think about what the game plan is for your meeting or engagement. What's achievable? I've often had clients say to me, look, I've got these 12 points and I've got a 15 slide PowerPoint that I want to show on a 6-minute video, and this is what I want to talk about. And you can imagine in a half an hour meeting or even a 15-minute meeting or whatever it is, you're going to lose them. So you need to have a game plan, but you need to understand what's achievable, what's realistic. You can't go in there with all of that information, but what can you go in there and talk to them about? So have a think about that. That's your game plan. Preparing is really important. So, as I mentioned before, understanding the operating environment, doing your research, making sure you understand what people, have done in their past. What other interests do they have that you might be able to connect with them about? Understand the operating environment. Is this a particularly difficult week that you're seeing them in? Is it personally or politically? Have they just, they've got another 16 meetings after you that day? Really zone in on what people are doing and what their life's like at the moment that you're meeting them, and be appreciative of that. In terms of the ask, you need to be realistic, but don't underplay your hand. I've often been in meetings where I've taken in really, chairs and boards of not-for-profits, big national not-for-profits, household names, who, they've got in the meeting and they've just been dumbfounded because they're in this meeting with the minister and they thought, we can't talk about the elephant in the room. We can't ask the question about the money. We'll get to that another time, even though that's specifically the purpose of the meeting. So you need to make sure that you're not scared or intimidated by politicians or these environments, because these guys do these meetings all the time. And as I say to people, they're just human beings. You can ask them whatever you want. All they can do is say no or not answer the question. So, nothing's going to happen. The world's not going to end, and you're not going to fall through the floor, through a hole in the floor. So, you need to, have one or two things that are achievable. I'll always say to people, have an ask that they can't say no to. And that might be, will the minister open this particular event for us next year? Or would the minister consider being involved with this project with us next year? There's no money needed. You need something that you'll get a big tick from, big tick to in a meeting. So, a big yes to that, and we'll come back to you on the other one. The big yes to the yes, we'll open the event, or we'll do the breakfast, or we'll speak at your whatever it is, allows you then to have an ongoing engagement with that office for 3-6 months in terms of preparing for that event, and allows you then to establish that relationship and allow you to bring other things into it off the back of that. So I always say, make sure that you've got in the bevy of your asks something that is going to be agreed to, and don't have too many, because at the moment I'm advising most people to go in there with the majority of their requests being either budget neutral or no budget at all required, or minimal, or advice on where to head for other budget options, because most meetings that I'm taking with clients across different ministers' offices is indicating that they're not really open for a lot of extra budget requests at this point of time. So quite often it's about engaging with them about what they can do, what programs you might be doing that they could cooperate with you. How can you help them? How can you do something for them, rather than you just going and asking them to do something? Turn it around, flip it upside down, and go, what can I do to help you? So you've got to have a game plan. You need to think about what you're going to achieve. You need to think beforehand what your aims and objectives are. I often say, think about being a kid in an exam. Write a couple of things on the back of your hand almost, or mentally think, what are the 2 points that I want to say in this meeting that I want to make sure I get in? And keep it simple, keep to the point. There are often meetings, and I've had one only a week ago, where we got into the meeting. We had 30 minutes scheduled with the minister. We got in there, and the minister said, "I've got 8 minutes." And you have to recalibrate what you want to achieve in that time. And so if your game plan was carefully rehearsed for weeks, and the game plan was, we're going to take them through 23 things, well, that's not going to happen. So you've really got to have in your mind, a number one, a number two, and then if you've got more time, you've got some other things you might be able to talk to them about. But I always say to people, it's really important just to engage and to get them engaged in your passion about why it is that you do what you do, and why what you do is important, is so, so important, I think. So that's really, I think, one of the best things you can achieve in a stakeholder meeting. Preparation is really important. So, preparing, LinkedIn's a great place to start, and it's important to make sure that you've got, other methods of doing research, so that it's really you've really nailed the information that you need about people. Scenario plan what's going on and what you may or may want to achieve. What might happen? You may get the 8-minute meeting when you thought you had 30 minutes, and understand the environment they're in. I've taken people in, and some people have been touched by the issues that we're canvassing about. I've worked with the Heart Foundation, and some people some people have been touched by that issue, or other people have been touched by other issues, mental health issues or other health issues, or they've got a strong passion for human rights issues, or whatever it is. So you need to find out about their background and be able to touch down on what it is that you're potentially going to be in agreement or interested in, which is, I think, a really important thing. The asks, as I said a moment ago, don't have too many of them. You need to be realistic at the moment with government, that you may not get everything on your wish list. You may not get much of what's on your wish list. And so unless your wish list is pretty much budget neutral and not very painful for the government, and often it's about compromising from the way you go into this engagement, what is it here that we can start with? What's a small baby step we can take that then will lead us on to something bigger with you, and funding around the corner, or a change of policy in the future? The engagement's got to start somewhere. From little things, big things grow, and this is where it starts. So, don't be concerned that you've got, your game plan is not huge, or the asks or your aims is not massive. You've got to start somewhere, and that's it's always better to start with a baby step than standing still and not taking any at all. Following up is really important. So, obviously, it's an ongoing process. It's so critical, and it's where things can actually just crystallize. So, I've worked with clients where they've said, household names, not-for-profits that are household names, and they've said, look, we're getting all the meetings, they're pleasant in the meetings, and they're not really saying a lot, and then afterwards, well, nothing happens. And then when you break it down, you peel back what's happened in those meetings, what's actually happened is there's been really no follow-up. They've sort of entered stage right and exited stage left, going, thank you so much for your time, Minister, but there's been absolutely no or virtually no follow-up afterwards in terms of going, well, what are the 4 things that we all thought was great today? There must have been some stuff. There isn't a meeting that I've attended ever with a politician or their staff that has not come up with an interesting idea that didn't warrant some sort of follow-up action. There is always ideas. Government, opposition, crossbench, that's their job. They're ideas peddlers, or they should be. And so, communicating with them and coming to a furious agreement about some ideas is really important, and that's where the follow-up comes. Following those up might take a while. It's a bit like, my 12-year-old on homework. You need to cajole and continue gentle pressure, but eventually those things will happen. They don't, you've got to remember that there is so many different issues on their plate. You're not the only person. So the follow-up is absolutely crucial, as is reviewing what you've achieved at that meeting. What could you have done better? How did it go? If it went fabulously well, or if your breakfast or morning tea went fabulously well, why did it go fabulously well? Bottle it. Try and make sure that you can replicate it again. Work out what it is you've done right in that meeting to get that person on board. You need to think about communications as well as part of a sustained media and government relations strategy. In my books, government and media are hand in hand. You can't communicate with government without communicating, and nor should you be doing it in a vacuum. Sometimes meetings are discreet and they're private, but often there will be a component that you want to talk to people about publicly, the stakeholders, or your other partners or your members or your donors, and you need to think about how you're going to roll that out and what does success look like in terms of being able to communicate to the people that you need to talk to. How are you going to talk about your engagement? What opportunities will come out of the events that you're doing? Think about crisis communications. That's always something that people often don't give any thought to. What are the issues that will be needing your focus in the next 6 to 12, 24 months? And how can that government engagement work be woven into what you're doing in the media? They should be interwoven. They shouldn't be separate. Social media is really important. It's absolutely critical that you utilise platforms, social media platforms. They're cheap, they're economical, and for not-for-profits, that's an absolutely wonderful place to be. So think about how you're going to tell people about what you're doing in terms of government engagement or just general campaigning. And social media is absolutely imperative to that. With your communications objectives, where have you succeeded? Where hasn't it worked? Why didn't it go anywhere? Often it's people put out just a media release and they hope it's going to go somewhere. Well, my husband's a journalist and I'm a former journalist, and I can tell you that he has about 833 unopened emails in his inbox. They get a lot of stuff in the email on email, and so often it's actually getting them personally and talking to them that's important. Not necessarily sending out a blanket pitch, individually saying to someone, look, I've got an exclusive here. This is what's happening. Are you interested? So, how will your communications work with your government engagement goals? How can they support what your government engagement goals are? Plan that out. Get the team together, get your executive, get your board together and really nut that out and think about what you might want to do with it and how's it going to pan out the next 6, 12, 24 months. So, your objectives, your communications options in terms of government is, ultimately start at the bottom. What do we want them to do? How do we want them to react? And then work from there. What will we say to them to get them to do something? What will that be? How will we get that message to them? And by just sending a tweet to your 32 followers, you're obviously not going to reach everyone you need. So you need to think about a multi-platform way of talking to a variety of people, and that includes government. So, when you're communicating to people, send them a media release that you've sent out. Send them a copy of the newsletter that you've sent to your members. Send them a copy of the brochure if you're trying to, influence them. Don't bombard them unnecessarily, but if it's important, then by all means, send them some information, more information to form a backdrop of what's going on. So this then leads us to the budget. And I've got a question here from Judy, actually, before we move on to the budget. She asks about how often you should be able to bug people to get a meeting. And whether or not it's important to do it by snail mail or via email in terms of meeting requests. Well, look, let's just take the last one first. I think that we never send meeting requests by snail mail. The only thing we do send by snail mail is requests or an invitation to an event, or perhaps a piece of collateral that a not-for-profit might want to send them, or I will send them something from me, a handwritten note. If it's something different, I think snail mail works. But if it's just a meeting request, I would never do it via snail mail. And your other question, Judy, was how often can you bug them? I think probably weekly, but just it's not the same email every time. It's different tones. You know that they're doing a diary meeting on Tuesday. We'll email them on Wednesday and then give them a call and say, oh, hi, whatever your name was. How are you going with looking at our meeting request? And I think that's, it's about taking the right tone, making sure you're not unnecessarily bugging them. But, and as I've said to many people, in the 4.5 years that we've had this agency, I haven't had a no to any request at all for a meeting. And I think that's by and large been persistent. So, you will get the meetings. You've just got to keep asking in the right way. And not being rude about it, because they do have a lot of things on their plate, and you're not the only person that's requesting a meeting. So thanks for that question, Judy. So planning for the federal budget, let's move on to that before we end today. So obviously the budget's coming up next year. Some of you may have issues that are going to be playing out in the budget. There may be important policy levers that are going to be impacted that you need to think about. There might be some bids that you put in for your own organisation that will be played out in the budget. So some of you may be already mid engagement in terms of lobbying people for a budget outcome. Some of you may not have started, but obviously, my approach to this stuff is that it starts the day after the last budget was brought down, or even before that. There are some organisations that we're working with at the moment that have got a 2-year waiting, 2 years out they're thinking about, or even more in terms of the next budget round. So if the budget if your funding federally is what's keeping you alive, then you need to be thinking about it if it's really absolutely critical. I often will say to people, have a think about other income sources as well, but that's another story. That's another webinar. But if the federal funding is absolutely vital, then you really need to get it right. So don't try very hard. Obviously, not to leave it to the last moment. So leading up to the budget, time's of the essence. If you haven't started, you have until next May. Decisions are being made right now, and over the holiday period, the various budget committees are meeting, and they are putting these things into place. And so, you need to, make sure that you're in front of the right people. You need to develop a clear position or an ask. So you need to make it simple. You may put in a submission to them, and they may have other questions about what it is that you're really wanting amongst that request for funding, what it's going to achieve. And I would simplify it. Think about using infographics. Infographics are a great way of informing people about what you're doing and what you need to do, and why you want the money that you're applying for. Simplify it. Talk about scalable options, because you might have put in a submission for funding for X amount, but really you're probably not going to get that, and that. But if you don't have the ability to have some scalable options, then you might just walk out with nothing. Or if you don't have an indication of how you might use different scalable options or different pools of pockets of money, because departments don't just have this sort of pot of cash. There's just one pot of cash. They often have, and I'm sure some of you know this, but they have different pots of cash sitting in different parts of the department. So, some money can be used for this, and other money can be used for that, and then there's other money that's not tied, and there's some money that is tied. It's usually tied. So you need to think about how you're going to approach that ask, and so don't rule anything out before you've ruled it in, I think, is the important thing to think about. Make sure that you're meeting the right people, and you need to develop a stakeholder list. You may not get the meeting with the minister or the critical parliamentary secretary next week, but you probably will get a meeting with their advisor, or at least a 5 or 10 minute phone call. We will often ask for just a 10 minutes of your time by phone. It's better that you get your little toe in the door and start talking to people, getting your message into the mix right now, or continue to get your message into the mix and prosecute that message, than just stopping because you can't get a meeting that you've requested and going, oh, well, we'll just walk away. Often the best way of continuing to lobby is to have a whole number of people talking about what you're doing, because you've got to remember, in government it's not just about the advisor meeting you and then they just go from one meeting to another to another. They're going back out and talking to colleagues, they're talking to their MPs and ministers, they're talking to people in different formats and different forums. So I think it's about getting your message out there and make sure you're getting your message into the mix. So as we don't have any more questions, that's it for the day. Thanks so much for joining us. It's been great to have you on the line. We've got another webinar coming up in December, which is a webinar about Webinar 101. And I've done some training with a number of not-for-profits in recent months who have decided to really explore that online communications for their own members mainly. And it's a cheap and economical way of bringing expertise and information to your own membership. So the next webinar is going to be exploring how to do a webinar and how to measure it and how to keep it exciting and interesting. So thanks so much again for joining us today. It's been lovely to speak with you, and have a great day. And look forward to hearing us, meeting you again online. We'll send you out details of the next webinar in coming days. Thanks so much.